Hello everybody, Bengaris here, and today we're going to be playing some Generation Zero. I had planned to play this for sort of the gaming side of the channel and everything for a while, and I actually recorded 2 individual runs of it, full runs. And then I deleted them for some reason. I don't know why I deleted it, but we also dealt with this in the Road to Commander, so now you'll actually get to see some pretty much just me playing the entire game. So let's start things off. We're gonna be a nerd shooting robots. It's nice to start off fresh again. And this is one thing, now that I know that there's no real point to get the XP boosting stuff, because there's like a level cap, which is stupid. If you want to see more about that, go to my Road to Commander series for Generation Zero. But yeah, if you want to see why this system's stupid, go to my Road to Commander thing, because it's very weird to have a leveling up system and then have a level cap that's not, like, that doesn't let you unlock a lot of these things when the game could totally allow you to do that. Give me the gnome. Oh, they made a tweak, I think, from the last time I played. They didn't have that little insignia down there to let you know when you're encumbered. I appreciate that existing, because I'm a loot whore. I don't wonder what they had the radio next to this. Was someone trying to off themselves? Make it quick. Now let's put that somewhere. I normally orchestrate these in sort of a range in terms of like I normally put them in sort of like ascending in terms of like firepower sort of a thing. So to go like pistol, SMG. It'd be like it's like a mixture of firepower and range. It's like, so it'd be like pistol, shotgun, SMG, rifle, or assault rifle, sniper rifle, like explosives, and so on. That's how I like to do it. Look at this rusty piece of junk. It will have to do. Let's track that since we're here. May as well do it. Also, having another weapon would be nice. Weapon variety in this game is very important, because otherwise you don't want to get stuck with a weapon that doesn't have enough ammo, and then you run out of it, and then you can't use the other ammo types. Aha!
You found old Bettan. Nice. It's rusty, but Grandpa went hunting recently, so it should still do the job. You keep it. Guns, not my thing.
Well, they need to become your thing, because otherwise you're probably going to die. For now, I need to check and see something, because a lot of these accounts are like linked between all the different loot you can find. So is this linked to my... Ah, it is. So we've got a bunch of weapons that we can just kind of steal. Now, they had reset vehicle. I don't know what that means. I guess it's like a debug tool for if the vehicle gets stuck somewhere, which I think is fair. I think it's one of those things where you want to have consequences for your players' actions in games, but at the same time, if they accidentally like ping into something and then like their vehicle's completely screwed, you don't want them like stuck trying to fix it without like some sort of debug tool. I think for the sake of this, we might not go that sneaky once we get things sort of upgraded. We're going to go loud and proud in the name of Sweden. I'm going to snipe them with my Magnum. I love when you have games that just put a giant scope on a tiny little gun. It always makes me think of that Men in Black scene where Jay gets the itty bitty teeny tiny little gun, and he doesn't realize how strong it is. It like flips cars over when you shoot it. Robots. Where be, robots?
That's a weird spot to offload a bunch of containers. There's no road leading up to it, not even a proper path.
I guess that's how machines were deployed all over Östertön. See if you can find out anything about those containers.
I mean, no path? There's literally one here. It's got lights and everything. It's the most proper path you could get before putting pavement down. I think this was an addition, because I remember in the early versions of the game this was not here. Doesn't really help with immersion when you've got a bunch of different shit going on. Alright, let's head back to base. Deal with our inventory, then we'll head out to that other safe room and sort of make our way through. I don't know how long this is going to take because I'm trying to kind of keep the ball rolling here with doing objectives and things like that. I don't really want to spend too much time looking for like guns and stuff. Love how a tiny, tiny little like ledge will just completely ruin momentum. I think that's one reason why I dropped using these vehicles, is just because they're really useless outside of using them on the main roads. It's weird. I doubt I will ever not come back. It's like, why'd you write it like that? Like, granted, that's probably like a translation issue. Because I think this game's natively Swedish. Like, it's not English set in Sweden. It's like fully Swedish in terms of production, as far as I know. Which could explain some things. I'm not saying that in like a negative light. I just mean like in terms of like with like mouth movement not syncing up, though you typically expect it to and stuff like that. Gotta get where we're going. We gotta go where we're getting. Road Songs by Vangelis, Volume 1. It is a nice detail that you can crouch during some of these sequences and not take damage from the smoke. That is nice. Okay, we're gonna go with Mr. Iron Pooch. Okay. That will now be his name. Let's do Path of the Gods. The very gods. We're on the road again. I can't wait to get on the road again. Shooting robots, running around and dying all the time. I can't wait to get on the road again. That's the thing, if vehicles like this were able to move quickly across like regular ground and not just roads, that would actually be nice. It's just, sometimes you're better off just sprinting around because these bikes have such janky sort of mechanics in terms of how to deal with certain scenarios. You know, like they get stuck on like the smallest shit, and it's really annoying. Some of these would be actually kind of nice. I'm not really going for stealth, but let's avoid getting knocked down. That would help a lot. Because getting stunned was a big problem whenever I played the game the first time around. Just because I'd get blown up, and because the ragdoll's a little twitchy, sometimes you'd be ragdolling way longer than you needed to, and the enemies would be shooting you in the penis, which is never good. It's never good when enemies shoot you in the penis. Need to find a way in. I'm gonna break my legs. There we go, broke my legs. How do you say open sesame in Swedish? This is one thing about this game that I've talked about, I think, in a couple other videos, but the game's got a good aesthetic. It's just that there's a lot of dead space in between doing things. You know, and that makes the game feel more empty than it actually is. When you've got a whole bunch of like dead space in between doing like missions and things. And also when you only have like 2 NPCs that actually interact in the base game, and then you get like an extra like 4 in like the rest of the game. It's just not a very good like mix in terms of like engaging the player. Like the tutorial area, the archipelago basically, is the most engaging part of the game because everything's fresh and new and you've got people to actually talk to, right? But after that, you're kind of just watching people's histories as they die. And that's kind of underwhelming when you view some of the quests that way afterwards. You know, basically there's not a lot of NPC interaction. It's more just reading things, listening to things, and that's kind of it. And I happen to think that bogs down the game a little bit. Because I think this game in principle isn't that bad. There's just a lot of things in it that I would personally tweak. You know, like that. Like I think more NPCs would make the game feel a little bit more, or more alive NPCs. I think would make the game feel a little bit more. It would give you more to invest in because you've got different NPCs you know, maybe have different NPCs that relocate to the main bunker in each area. You know, kind of like how what's her face and Pontus like relocated to the one in the archipelago. You know, if every zone had a couple NPCs you could send back to base, so to speak, that would be kind of cool. Maybe they give you some missions as well. You know, make it a little bit more interactive than, you know, open a door, turn power on, get new quests. You know, and then it's very is unpersonal a word? It's very unpersonal. It's not very personable, I guess is a better way to put it. You know, there's just a lot of stuff that probably could have been done better to sort of facilitate more meaningful interactions, because, you know, if you play this game a certain way, like, if you don't count the DLC, which came much, much later, then you've basically got a lot of NPC interaction in the beginning, which might put some players off just because it's so front-loaded. You know, like Therese won't shut up in the beginning. And then the rest of the game is utterly quiet, so it's not paced well at all. Wow, thanks, game. I thought I had like a bunch of adrenaline shots on me. Why couldn't I use one? There's no way I just had one. There's no way I just had one. Yeah, I've got 9. Why the fuck did it limit me? Oh god, now things are messed up. This is one bad thing about the game too, is the DLC kind of throws off the slow progression of enemies. Because you end up getting stuff like that, where you're fighting enemies that are way tougher than you're fighting enemies that are way tougher than the ones that are supposed to be in that area at this time. Right, it's very off-putting. See, yeah, we'll reach the quest before we reach the base. But we'll just keep on sprinting. There's one thing I do like about some games is when they have the sort of like the 2-stage sprint, where you have like the super fast sprint, but then you have like the slower but regular sprint that you can use more often. I kind of like that as sort of like a mechanical trade-off. It's like you still have the sprint function as sort of a unique sort of speed boost, but at the same time, for long traversal, you have like the jog or whatever it would be considered. I wonder what game did that first, where they had like sort of the split sprint thing. Now let's have some fun with our cornucopia of ammo we're about to get. Now, I remember this being kind of funny because you can deploy all of these around you, and I don't think there's an actual cap in terms of like how many you can place. I think it just places them sort of randomly around you. Yeah, look at all them. Again, I mentioned this in the last video, but it would have been nice if they had like little NPCs that you could interact with, get some story nearby of surviving against robots. Would make the world a little bit more deeper than just robots running around and we find like 40 dead people in all of Sweden. It'd actually be kind of cool, coming back to the NPC point of them being in little bases. It'd actually be kind of cool if you meet an NPC in a, like you meet them in little caves where like the safe areas are, and then some of them, and then they mention, like some of them mention like going somewhere else, and then returning to the cave, and some of them don't come back. So you like, you know, make it ambiguous, be like, oh man, did they make it? I don't know. Okay, he's just cheating. He's just straight cheating, shooting me through shit. That's not cool. You know, this actually might be a good time to talk about something about this game that I've kind of had mixed feelings on, is sort of how big the world is. Because on the one hand, this map is quite large in terms of physically how much exists in terms of where you can go. The overarching problem, though, is that a lot of it's sort of barren, right? That's kind of a problem that a lot of games that try to be open world suffer from. or I shouldn't say try. If you either are or you aren't, right? At least I've never seen an in between. But the main point is that with an open world game like this, where you can kind of go wherever, whenever, is you need to make it you need to take advantage of the open world nature of it and have shit to do, right? And it kind of depends on how you choose to do things that ultimately dictates whether you've made a good open world game or a bad open world game, or an open world game that really didn't need to be open world, right? Like this game, for example, is a really good example of how to make a game that looks big but is much larger than it needed to be, right? Like this whole map, for example, right? It looks huge on the map, right? It looks huge. When you get down to the actual content within the maps, in terms of things that are unique and not just the repetitive like robot shooting, you actually end up with a lot less than what the map can justify, basically. So on the one hand, you have all these little villages and towns and stuff, and it's like, yeah, there's some neat things here and there. Some of them don't even have quests. Some of them just have like collectibles, which is like, that's one thing that you can argue is like, okay, like that's good that at least there's something there to make players want to go and check it out. Oh, hey! Yeah, it's one of those weird things where, when a map, the map versus the game ratio, in my opinion, should be like 2 to 1. Like, the content should be about half as big as the map in terms of what you actually get to do. This game's ratio is much more in line with like a 4 to 1 ratio, where the map is way bigger than it used to be, for the sake of like content within the map. But yeah, the main point I was kind of getting to with the earlier rant was just games need to justify how big they are in terms of content, not in terms of how big something physically is. Like Skyrim's a really good example of how to make a good open world game that's relatively simple in terms of the way the design works. Is like you have different areas of the map that are different geologically, and then you just you sort of work your way inward, right? That might not be the best way, but basically you work from the largest, most important points of the world out, right? So in Skyrim's case, when you want specific landmarks, okay, maybe you start with the throat of the world, right? The center of the map, right? Then you make each hold capital, right? Then you draw the borders of each hold, and then afterwards you make a map of everything that needs to be significant for major quest lines, right? Or for the main quest line. Then you do everything for the other major quest lines, and then after that, you just fill in the gaps with little caves and ruins and things like that. Like, so you make every encounter different in different ways based on the level design, what you get out of each area, and if it's tied to specific quests or not. But that's the beauty of Skyrim, is that it's a very livable, breathable world where each little area is different and unique in its own way. It might have the same enemies, it might have the same overall sort of structure, but it feels differently because it's in a logical place within the world that makes sense, given what you know about the Nords and the way Skyrim is, geologically, as well as it gives you different things all over the place, of new areas to explore, new people to interact with, and new quests to find as you go through shit. And that's kind of one of the major positives, to Skyrim, is that the map is very there's always somewhere to explore, and that's the biggest part of that map that makes it beneficial for gameplay reasons, is because at any time, like, you drop your character anywhere in that map, you are guaranteed to have at least one location on your first playthrough that you've not reached yet that you can see on your minimap, or you can see physically but you haven't been there, right? And that's one of the big boons of having a game like that, where you can just kind of drop things in. This game does that, but does it far less in quantity, and that's where the quality kind of shifts for this game specifically. Like, if this game had far more quests in it, like double the quests basically, and it took you to all the areas in the game, then it would justify being as big as it is, or at least get closer to justifying it. But Yeah, that's my rant on that. It's one thing too that I've been playing a lot of video games lately that make me want to write like a story around something similar. Like I have a lot of fun like thinking of I guess you'd call it like fan fiction sort of theories type of things. It's not really fan fictions, more so as like expanded universe type things for certain games. Like I was playing Dead Island Riptide, you know, and I was thinking about that whole story of being on like, you know, that island chain wherever it was. So yeah, I'm always inspired by things that I find to be interesting, or at the very least have an interesting premise. And I thought about making some sort of like short story channel or do something along those lines where it's kind of a thing where it's kind of an ode to this particular type of game or something, or this particular idea. But obviously I don't have the rights to do things in these different worlds. But I'd like the idea of doing things in a similar manner. You know, so I was thinking of an idea for a sort of like Dead Island-esque story, but in like, say, Hawaii, you know? I just thought that'd be kind of interesting, and you can do a lot with a lot of things. You know, there are a lot of ideas are great in premise, and just the execution is where they're fucked up. Because people just don't execute the ideas in the most optimal way. That's one thing that all of us enjoy as human beings is just storytelling. We really enjoy storytelling, just kind of across the board. Just as a species, we like telling and hearing stories. And we like hearing good stories a lot. You see nothing? You see nothing! I'm a leaf on the wind. Watch how I soar. And run away. I am the greatest and most elegant version of every chicken on the planet. I love raining games. Especially when it's animated right. When they get the atmosphere. It's nice. Come to think of it, I'm just biased against rain in the woods. Just in general. I like that as an aesthetic. Oh yeah, the little Russian bots are around here now. I don't know why, but I always found the Russian, like, basic bots, these little dudes, to be very cute. I have no real reason why. I think it's just because they're little balls just rolling around. And I find that kind of hilarious. Isn't this? Oh yeah, it does that weird shit where I have to run up here. I remember that fucked with me on my first playthrough. It was like, why are these things not unlocking? And I had like a massive aneurysm for like several hours trying to figure out why the things would not unlock, and all I had to do was walk up some stairs. And one thing that I would like to do for the channel is, I don't really intend to do this with all games I've played previously, but there are a couple games that I would like to replay for the channel, just to replay them because they're fucking fun. Like I've wanted to replay Just Cause 2 for a long time, just because I really enjoy playing Just Cause 2. But there's an NVIDIA issue where I use NVIDIA Shadowplay to record, and for some reason, just NVIDIA has a hard time working with that game in particular. The game crashes a lot when recording, and it's only when recording, so that makes it very annoying to deal with. Because I would like to play the explosion game and have fun with the explosion game. It's like there are shotguns but not people. I guess the aliens took them. This thing is ridiculously accurate. It's got next to no kick. It's fantastic. Shit. Oh, double shit. Quadruple shit. Fuck. The more I play this, the more I think just going for the bunker, then doing the missions might be the best bet for getting things done. 'Cause going to the safe rooms is useful, but if we don't need to travel back to a place once we've been there once, then we're good. Don't really need that much help whenever you got that going on. I'm trying to wonder if we'll hit the level cap before we finish the game. Because one thing I was really disappointed with was the fact that there is a level cap, even though you can fill up, like, why not let people fill up the skill tree? It's like, come on. Just one of those weird things where, like, you have the whole skill tree, and it's like a single player / co-op game. So why not let people fill up the skill tree completely, you know? Like, if it's a PvP game, I can kind of understand why you'd want to balance things and not give everybody all the abilities at any one time. You know, the more I play this game, you know, having recorded several different things for it, some of which never got uploaded, but like replaying it over and over and over, I find myself kind of seeing it as like I'm starting to see like kind of the overarching flaw of the game a lot more often the more I think about it, and I'd say the overarching flaw of this game is just arbitrary extension. I think is probably the best way to put it, just because there's a lot of stuff in the game that I like. Like, I like the level up system. I like how it's broken down. I like how there's like a mastery at the bottom of each tree that you can use, or each pathway that you can use. I like the world design overall. I like how some of the quests work. The biggest problem to me, though, is that a lot of these things they're arbitrarily extended by the fact that there's so much dead space in between doing things. And that's kind of the big problem to me. You know, because if this map was the same sort of, like if this map had the same content in it, but it was scaled down to like a third of its size or something like that, then I think you could actually have a game where you could constantly do missions without having to run across the world for like half the time, right? And I think that's the biggest overarching problem. You know, it's just there's so much slow sort of progression that everything feels way slower than it probably needs to be. You know, it's like everything is very slow to develop, right? Like getting from A to B is very slow, you know, unless you unlock shit. Getting from, you know, one quest location to another can be kind of annoying unless you have fast travel. And it's like, there's a lot of stuff in the world that probably doesn't need to be had, you know. Like, a lot of this world has this world feels like it's laid out logically, but not, but it doesn't gel well with playing a game, so to speak, right? Like one thing I think about whenever you make a big open world game is how everything fits into taking care of things in the game. Like, how do you do things in the game, and how does that affect playtime, right? Because one thing that I think a lot of players can sort of agree on is that when there's a lot of dead space in between things, that's usually not a good thing, right? And there is kind of an argument that can be had between, you know, what constitutes dead space in between things versus having, you know, versus having a, yeah, so like my main point with all this is basically just going, like, the game takes too long to do shit a lot, and that's a problem that bogs down the overall experience when you've got all these different things that you can do in the game, but there's not a whole lot to kind of grip you while you're doing it, right? A lot of, like, I bet if you broke down all the shit that you do in the game throughout a playthrough, like, I bet if you took my playthrough, right? My playthrough where I know where I'm going, I know what I'm doing, you know, I have previous knowledge of the game, you know, and, you know, maybe you ask yourself, well, okay, well, how long would it take me to do the content if I didn't have to run everywhere, right? Like, take all the running time that I do in this game, and then see how long that is compared to the total runtime of playing the game. You know, I would be very interested to see, you know, how much time is spent in this game just running around, right? Because this is one of the things that I think people could take part in a couple other games and say that, oh, they have this same problem too. I would say that some games don't have this problem because, you know, and I'd use Skyrim as an example of a really good open world game that a lot of people have played, that they've played a lot of, so to speak. You know, and Skyrim, I think, is a good open world game because, oh my god, will you fuck off and quit looking at me? But anyway, so Skyrim is a good example of an open world game because there's a lot of stuff that you do sort of in between the big shit, right? Like there's a lot, like there's more layers to what you can do in that game compared to this one. Now, obviously, you don't have to make a game exactly like Skyrim to make a good open world game, but I do think it is something that's worth talking about. You know, when you make a video game that is open world, or at least mostly open world, and then you have it where fuck you, fence. But when you have it where there's a lot of dead space within the content, as opposed to filling it with lots of things to do and encounter and interact with, you know, I think that shows the difference in sort of design philosophy as well as the outcome of that philosophy. Because I think video game design in general, a lot of people seem to get hung up on, or a lot of people seem to get really hung up on what the devs were thinking about doing versus what they actually did, right? And that's a big problem I've seen a lot of people that criticize games and other things too, but mainly with video games. It's like they criticize what could have been, like they criticize and talk about what could have been as opposed to what we actually have, because what we actually have, I would argue, is more important than whatever the developers were thinking about doing. Alright, I need to find the bridge. But yeah, just kind of going back to the arbitrary extension of playtime with this. You know, like, this is a good example of it, right? The fastest traversal from like one location to another is either going to be sprinting and just beelining it to it, or it's going to be you take the bike or the motorcycle and drive everywhere, right? And that's actual travel. That's not counting. It's not counting like fast travel. And fast travel works, right? And this is the thing where I think this game overall would be a better game if it was packaged in a smaller world, right? Because there's, again, talking about doing things in an open world game, the beauty of games like Skyrim, now come to think of it, a lot of Bethesda games, sort of pre-Fallout 76, you know, just there are a lot of things that make those games fun to engage with because there's always something new happening. You're always finding a new location, a new story with an NPC, someone to interact with, a new enemy to fight. There's always something to do, and that's the thing that I think makes games interesting. Is there's always something to do, right? And the best way I can explain this in terms of like different art forms would be if you have, you know, like a movie. You know, if you're watching a movie, you don't want to watch a movie where it shows all the characters going from A to B, right? Like imagine if you took a game like this and compared it to a movie, and then had this like whatever percentage of this game was travel time, put that into the movie. Right, that would get really annoying real quick if you had to actually like go through and see everybody get from A to B, you know, when there's not much going on, right? And going back to the Skyrim comparison, Skyrim's really interesting when it comes to exploring because of all the different places you can go that have shit to interact with, either with enemies, loot, puzzles. and NPCs. And the biggest strength of Skyrim, in my opinion, is well, one of the biggest strengths, I guess I should say. One of the biggest strengths of Skyrim is that the NPCs, you know, whenever you spend a long time going somewhere, you'll usually get an NPC interaction that is somewhat meaningful or interesting or engaging at a certain point, right? It's not a thing right here where we spend like 15 minutes running somewhere only to find like a journal of someone saying, shit hit the fan, I'm gonna die, basically. You know, like there's more meaning to the stuff in the Skyrim game. In the Skyrim game, wow, I'm kind of tired if you can't tell. But you know, it's like there's a deeper layer of content within them compared to this game. You know, and obviously this game's not made on the same budget as Skyrim probably was, and wasn't as successful as Skyrim was, right? So, you know, I think there's stuff you can read into with that, you know. But like my main point still kind of stands that this game suffers from sort of dead time in between doing shit, and that's ultimately what I think kills games. It kills any art form, really. Whenever something feels boring or feels slow, you're not gonna have a good time experiencing it, right? Like, part of the reason why the Lord of the Rings trilogy of films are so great is because we're always getting something new in each of the scenes, right? And this is one thing, like, long games are not bad. Long games with little content are bad, right? And that's the thing that I think most gamers can agree upon, is like when you have a game that has no real content that changes after a certain point, you know, then the game becomes really boring, you know, when you play through it, even if you only play through it once, right? Like, and this happens in different degrees, right? Like this game, for example, there's a lot of dead time running around, right? A lot of dead time running around, you know, and it's a thing where you only have to run around a little bit, and then you get a save room, then you can warp back. But still, there's a lot of running around here that might have been better off doing something else. You know, this game has a lot of running around that kind of takes up a lot of the time of actually playing the game, and there's nothing that you're doing, right? It's not like some other games where they balance like a running section with dialogue from characters and stuff like that, you know, or, you know, they don't, you know, sort of, they don't fill in the dead space with something that would work in that given space, right? Like a good example of the way a lot of video games do it is if there's going to be a section of the game where you're going to be walking for a bit and there are no enemies, or you're going up an elevator, that's a really good time to drop dialogue, because nothing's happening, so the player could focus on the dialogue and not be distracted by something else, and it also fills in the dead space of not actually having anything to do besides walk down a corridor, go up or down an elevator, so on and so forth, right? There are ways to fill in the dead space with something meaningful that can justify having the dead space in the first place. The problem with this game is that there's no dialogue, like hardly in the game, in terms of interactions with people's stories, right? And that's ultimately what I think is one of the bigger problems with the game as well, is just there's a general lack of content on the NPC side of things. Like a lot of it is sort of the same shit over and over and over, where you come across a survivor group, you see their journal of things going to shit, or you hear a recording of things going to shit, and then you see how things went to shit, and then you loot their stuff and move on. It gets kind of repetitive, you know, especially when you're doing this across this game for however many hours you happen to be playing it. You know, and that's a problem that needs to be addressed, you know, whenever you deal with a game, because, like I said, boredom is the thing that's going to kill your game. It doesn't matter if you have like one boring section in the middle of the game, or, you know, what have you. You know, it's not going to matter if you have just one section that's boring and then everything else is fun. That boring section is going to stick in people's minds because it's boring. You know, and there was another point I was going to make, and then I got sidetracked. There's a beacon over there. I see that beacon. I would enjoy destroying that beacon. I just think it's a thing where there's a lot of balancing issues in this game regarding what you do and what you experience and the downtime in between those things. Oh boy, how am I going to make it up there? But yeah, just games need to balance the content within in terms of what you're actually doing versus when you don't have shit to do. Especially when you have something repetitive going on. You know, I would cite a good example of a short game that can get really boring really fast is Outlast. Just because, you know, Outlast basically has the same scares and the same sort of, I don't even know if you want to call them puzzles because that's a little bit too much dignity for them. But a lot of the puzzles and encounters in Outlast are very repetitive. You know, you basically do the same shit over and over and over. You know, you run away from a dude or two, maybe a named dude like Chris Walker or whatever, and then you have to find a key, and then maybe you throw a switch, you know, and so like the mechanical engagement in that game like falls off a cliff after a while because you're just doing the exact same mundane shit over and over. That's not engaging to a player's brain. Right, now some people can have a lot of fun with Outlast, but by the time the ending is like sort of done and dusted and the game is, you know, quote unquote finished, you've kind of gotten past the initial stage of, oh, this is graphic and gross and, you know, horrible things are happening here. By that point, you just want some mechanical fucking variety. Right? And Mahler actually made a really good point in his breakdown of it that, you know, the best sequence of the game, the Traeger bit, is right in the middle. It's right in the middle of the game in terms of all if you break down all the encounters, Traeger is right in the fucking middle. And he's right in the fucking middle, you know, to break up the monotony. You know, and it's something that I think is sort of often forgotten about when talking about like games is, you know, it helps to have things that work constantly to keep the player engaged. You know, and like we talked about, you know, Skyrim's a good example of how to keep players engaged because, you know, when you've got, you know, constant interaction with new locations, new enemies, along with NPC interactions and dialogue, you know, you can fill that void with something meaningful, engaging, and interesting, as opposed to doing what some other games do, where they just kind of take the same idea and just repeat it over and over and over, where it's very minimal to begin with. But yeah, I have a really big problem with games that have I have a problem with games that are repetitive, where the gimmick dies quickly, basically. You know, and one thing is, some people like think that I'm talking out of my ass when I say gimmick, just because they think I'm saying something that I'm not. And when I say gimmick, I say sort of the main selling points of the game. When the main selling point of the game is shoehorned into the game, even when it's detrimental to actually playing the game, it's not good for the game's lifespan or for players who play the game at all. Right? Like, you know, it's one of those things where, you know, depending on the way the game sort of sells itself to the player as you play it, that drastically affects, you know, what you're going to be able to handle and do, you know, when playing the game. You know, and it's a thing where with Outlast and with this game, they both suffer from repetitiveness, right? And you do the same basic shit over and over and over. Now, I think this game is better than Outlast in that regard, because even though things are sort of cosmetically different, there is a little variety in terms of how you actually interact with some of the things going on. Like, for example, in Outlast, a lot of the enemy encounters are the same, because you basically just, there's a dude, run away from him, right? And that's basically mechanically all you do. they might switch it up by having you flip a switch of some kind, or basically, and this is the thing that I think people should think about more when designing games and when criticizing games is, what is the player mechanically doing, right, during the encounter that you have set up for them? Are they interacting? Are they interacting with NPCs and getting dialogue, or are they doing something else? Sort of what are they doing, and how does it affect what they're doing right now? But anyway, again, my big thing is with the games that I mentioned is when you mechanically do something that is the same over and over and over, because the longer your game is, the more I think you should vary things or expand upon certain mechanics and how the player interacts with the game, right? Because it's one thing to have, and this is the thing, the difference between a gimmick and core mechanics, in my eyes, are that core mechanics are things the player can use in different ways to help them deal with issues in the game, versus a gimmick, which is a selling point of the game, or is something that the game desperately wants you to acknowledge that the game does, right? And this is one thing that I think Outlast suffers from immensely, is that, after a while, you've done the same shit over and over, and it becomes less of an encounter with some crazy psycho or some weird enemy or what have you. It eventually devolves into, the game is telling me to be scared now. The game just keeps telling me to be scared when it throws a jump scare at me, of some crazy looking dude. And it's just, it does the same, it's like a comedy routine where the joke is the same every single time, and the longer the game, the more grinding and annoying the joke becomes, right? Imagine if I told you a knock-knock joke, the same knock-knock joke, for an hour. The same joke. The exact same joke. Maybe I switch characters in it, but it's the exact same joke, right? That's going to get boring as fuck extremely fast, right? And that's similar to sort of video games that do the same sort of mechanical encounter over and over and over. Now, a good comparison, I would say, to kind of counteract the sort of show the opposite end of Outlast, is Amnesia: The Dark Descent, because a lot of the puzzles and interactions in that game are different in some way, right? If you're encountering different enemies, you encounter different enemies in different areas that function differently in the scenario. It's not the same mechanical thing that you do in Outlast, where the only real differences are the number of enemies, the number of buttons you have to interact with, and the level design itself, right? And that's something that I think... Shit, how am I going to get in here? I don't know how to get into this base. But that's kind of a thing where Amnesia does a good job of spacing things out and giving you different encounters to liven up the experience overall, right? The puzzles, for instance, are different, and they're different types of puzzles. It's not a walk up to a thing, press a button, throw a switch, move on. You actually have to do something, right? There are logic puzzles in there, find out why this thing is broken, or figure out why this thing isn't working correctly. Is there something jamming this device? Is there something, it gives you different things to engage your brain. That way you're not going, where is thing, must interact with thing, and then you move on. And that's something this game suffers from a little bit, is just kind of, the things are basically the same. The fuck? That's actually a good sort of jump scare, actually. This game does do things right on some occasions, right? It's not a... I would not describe this game as a terrible game. I would describe it as a boring game, right? And I think there is a difference, right? I think a terrible game is a game that tries to do something and fails massively, and a boring game is a game that just needs to make some tweaks for the sake of making the experience more enjoyable. But as it stands, I like most things in the game. I just think the pacing of this game is the worst aspect of it. It's just slow. Those enemies, I think, are awesome, but a huge pain in the ass at the same time. I really like their design. I think it's very cool, but it's also very prone to just fuckery. Just extreme fuckery. Is this a portion of, like, is this percentage proportionate to the damage dealt, or the damage, or like the health I have? Like when it says 1.5%, is that 1.5% of the damage I deal, or my health back every time I damage them? I don't know. I need a lot of textiles. Yeah, well, that'll help for something at least. Now we head south for the winter and do other duck shit. This is one problem with games like this that are it's not, well, I mean, it's not necessarily it's not necessarily a hard problem. Like, it's not a hardcore issue in terms of, you know, it ruins the game or anything like that, or is a major issue, but it is a thing in open world games where if you have content that needs to be found, basically, in order to interact with it, you kind of have to do the work yourself in different ways. And there's no real easy workaround to that other than just dropping everything in your menu at once, or giving severe hints of, like, extreme hints of, hey, this area is interesting, go here. You know, unless you just kind of hold the player's hand, there's no real way to get around, you know, missing content whenever you play a game, besides just wandering around and looking for shit. Which, I mean, some games, you know, kind of excel at making that fun, and that's the part where that kind of redeems the fact that, you know, you have to wander around to find shit. Physics. Pure physics right there. Alrighty, before we begin this, we need to prep our ammo here. We're going to need a lot of ammo for this little bit because it's a very long mission. It's very long and kind of annoying. Alright. How much ammo do we have now? About 2,500. Sweet. Now let's begin. From what I can gather based on some of the community reaction, this is one of the most hated missions of the game, just because it's an escort mission where you literally have to stay within like 10 meters of the truck, otherwise it'll pause and just not move. It's very underwhelming and very slow paced, and that's not fun.
Look, we know there are weapons and ammo locked away in the police station in Himarvet. If you manage to get them for us, you'll get a few as well.
Was that it? Really? That was it? I came back here for like one line of dialogue? I really do wonder how long this game would be if you cut out all the dead space of just running places. I bet it would be a significant difference. Like, easy third, maybe 2/5 of the game just completely gone.
I can't wait to move back upstairs.
Remain silent. Why do you need to caption that? Alright. Well, there's all the shit for Generation Zero. I'm so glad I wrapped this up now. But, yeah, I'm not sure which game I'm going to be playing next. I am trying to bounce back and forth between fun things I want to do and games I want to get through. So I'm probably going to be bouncing back and forth between this and some modded Modern Warfare 2 stuff at the moment. I'm still figuring it out, but we will see how that goes. But I just want to thank you all for watching, and I will see you guys later.